Let's move on. Vodafone Idea's 18,000 crore rupee FPO opens today. The company has raised around 5,400 crores from anchor investors. Reema caught up with Akshaya Moondra, who is the CEO of Vodafone Idea, to talk about the FPO details and their business outlook. Listen in.
Vodafone Idea has launched a massive, the largest ever FPO of 18,000 crore rupees, and the anchor book boasts of some big names: Fidelity, GQG, UBS, and the anchor book has raised about 5,400 crore. Joining me today is Akshaya Moondra, CEO of Vodafone Idea. Akshaya, thank you very much for joining in. You've got some marquee investors on board, foreign and domestic investors. The question is, what next now?
So Reema, very happy to be here, and let me just say, while you've mentioned some of the names, which is GQG, Fidelity Management Research, UBS, there's also RWC there in the foreign portfolio investors. Amongst the domestic, we have very good names like HDFC Mutual Fund, Motilal Mutual Fund, Quant Mutual Fund, and there are also some insurance companies. And one of the strong points of the anchor book is that the allocation to hedge funds is less than 5%, which speaks for the strength of the anchor book. What next? First is we still have the 70% of book build process to be completed, we are working over it, and the last day is 22nd. But let's say, what do we do with this funding? That's the main question. And we are going to use this basically for growth capex. This is not the only funding we are doing. This is a part of the funding, 18,000. You're aware 2,075 crores will come from promoters. And we are also in discussion with our lenders. And the way the funding is being raised is to have a total availability for growth capex, which can meet our requirements for 4G coverage expansion, 4G capacity growth, and the 5G rollout. And when we do this, we are confident that we'll be able to arrest the loss of subscribers and start participating in the growth of the industry, which we have missed out for the last few years.
So talk to us about your capex plans, because that is the necessary input to arrest your subscriber decline. From the FPO proceeds, it's 12,750 crore, which is outlined and earmarked for your capex.
Right.
Once you get the bank funding in, and out of the total capital raise of 45,000 crore rupees approximately, how much goes into capex? And if you could break that up in 4G and 5G.
So let's say, again, I can't give you specific guidance, but let's start with the FPO proceeds. 12,750 for capex. Spectrum is about 2,000, but spectrum is, we don't need to buy much of a new spectrum. So the split of 12,750 crores is 5,720 for 5G rollout, and the remaining 7,000 is for 4G, roughly equally split between 4G coverage expansion and 4G capacity growth. I would say this spread is also largely the mix of our larger capex. That's why this is reflecting in the RHP. So this would be there, but just to make a point that while we need to grow the 4G capacity, we need to roll out 5G. The reason why we lose subscribers disproportionately today is only because of lack of 4G coverage. And today our share of new customer acquisitions is actually higher than our customer market share. So the only thing we need to arrest is the loss of subscribers, and which I'm very confident that once we are able to plug this coverage gap, we should be able to do much better than where we are today.
How soon before you start participating in growth? Do you have an internal assessment on where you want your revenue market share to be? You started off at a much higher number, but say in the next 3 years, do you want it to rise to 25%? Is there a number that you have in mind?
So again, we have a number in mind. I will not be able to share that with you right now.
In the mid-20s, is that fair? Early 20s?
Let's say we should improve our market share. And what happens is, and you can see there are cases in the past, whenever an operator has expanded their coverage to participate in a larger geography, it is inevitable that some improvement will happen. This has happened multiple times in the past. How much, when, I'll leave it for your judgment and the audience judgment, but definitely there are precedents available. When anybody has expanded their coverage to fill the gaps vis-a-vis competition, they have benefited from that.
Okay. And on 5G, why are you only targeting covering 40% of your revenue base in the next 2 to 2.5 years when your peers already have a pan-India rollout?
So I think 5G, let's say that is our plan today. It could be modified. That is how we see things today. And you would have seen what has happened with 5G is that on the consumer side, there is not so much of 5G use case, and monetization has been a challenge. I think when the rollout happened a year ago, there was this sense of that when 4G came out, somebody missed out, so we should roll out quickly. Can it become a factor in terms of, again, gaining disproportionate market share? Now, we've had 5G for a year. We've not seen that happening. And the major difference there is that when we moved from 3G to 4G, on your phone, you could see a very big experience difference. 5G, that is not the case. The speed is much higher, but in terms of what you see on your small screen, that is not such a discernible difference.
Now on the question of how and when on tariff hikes, right? Your ARPU is 145. What is your own internal assessment? When can the first tariff hike take place, quantum, and the next one?
So one is that the Indian ARPUs are the lowest, and I think lowest not by a small margin, by a big margin. So that is the important factor. The second thing to be kept in mind is that today none of the players are returning their cost of capital. And it has not been just a year or so, it has been 5 or 6 long years. And that was the scenario when 4G investments were made. 5G investments have added on to that, and 5G monetization is still not to be seen. So the imperative for tariff correction just to get to a return on cost of capital being there.
So what should the ARPU be for you to be able to return your cost of capital?
Again, I'm not at a liberty to say that, but there is enough commentary from our peers, and I would say that...
300? That's the commentary from your peers?
So that number appears to be right.
Okay. So ARPUs need to be at 300 for the industry to make a return on their investment?
In the current form and the current level of 5G investments, of course, anything is related to the size of investment. And as things stand today, that looks like.
Okay. So guide the market, right? The street is expecting today that we will see a tariff hike post-elections of a magnitude that we've seen in the past, which was 20%, right? The last 2 tariff hikes were 20%. So guide the market. Is this a fair assessment in your own mind?
So I would describe it like this, that I cannot say what would be the next price increase, when and how, but I would say that generally speaking, we have seen that this quantum of price increase is absorbed in the market without much of an implication. So I would say that the consumer at this level is willing to accept, and I think generally we've seen in India, you meet many consumers, they are happy to say that, okay, we are willing to pay a slightly higher price or slightly higher ARPU, but we want better services. So I think...
So 20% can be absorbed if we see one?
I'll not say that, I'll leave it, I've told you enough to...
Okay. So what's the way forward once the moratorium comes to an end in September of 2025? Do you think the company can generate enough cash flows to meet the government obligations?
Okay, let me say, as I mentioned, that our new funding is largely for growth capex, and our plan to meet the existing debt, vendor payments, and the government obligation is out of internal accruals. Now, of course, we expect the internal accruals to improve as we make investments. The only thing I would say is that you are aware of the reforms package, and the reforms package has a provision that post the moratorium, the deferred installment series which is there, the government can convert that to equity. So I think this is somewhat into the future. Probably we will need government support for some time, but over a long period of time, we believe that our operations should be sufficient to meet these obligations.
But September 2025 is a year and a half away. You think at that time some more government support will be needed?
That is there in the package, that was given there for a reason.
So there is a high chance the government will convert some of the installments into equity in your own math?
Could be, that could be a possibility.
So that means further dilution, right?
Yeah. But I think the way you are talking about dilution, it looks like it's not a good thing to happen. And let me clarify that point, which I've tried to clarify to some investors also, is that dilution is not good when out of your total capital employed, equity becomes disproportionately higher, because then equity is considered to be the costly capital. In our case, we have a leverage balance sheet. So on one side, you will hear people saying that we should reduce our leverage. How do you reduce your leverage? One, by improving your operations. Second, by getting more equity. Now, whether that equity comes from external investors or it comes from the government doesn't really make a difference. So in our situation, dilution is not a bad thing.
Okay. But is there a threshold below which the promoters do not want their stake to go down below?
I think that's a question you have to ask the promoters. I run the operations. I can only answer for the company and the management.
Okay. And since we're on the subject of the promoters, since it appears the cycle may be turning for the company, right? You've gone through troubled times. What about, why didn't Vodafone PLC participate in the preferential issue? When ABG Group put in money, more than 2,000 crore, why didn't Vodafone PLC put in money?
I think there are two things, and we have to see this in perspective, because sometimes we just tend to see what is happening today. Let's see, in 2022, we had raised capital. And in fact, at that point of time, we were in the process of raising the complete fundraise. Unfortunately, the government conversion got delayed at that time, and so the external fundraise got delayed. So if you see between 22 and now, a total of 7,000 crores of equity, including the forthcoming equity by the preferential issue, has come, out of which 4,000 crores has come from Vodafone Group and 3,000 crores has come from ABG. So it's not that Vodafone Group has not invested. Yeah, you are aware it is their stated policy that they would not bring capital from outside India to India, but their Indian assets can be redeployed, which is what they've done the last 2 times.
Okay.
So when they invested in the rights issue, they used the Indian assets. When they've invested capital in 2022, they've used the Indian assets, and they have some more of it left.
Okay, got it. Now, since the company is on a growth path, right, the money that you're raising right now, you know, bank plus equity, this will suffice you for how long, according to you? And if you could give us a capex number for 3 years.
So again, I'm not allowed to share the exact number, but as I said, the money that we are raising through the FPO preferential issue and the debt funding is meant for growth capex, and I believe it should cover our capex requirements for the next 3 years or so.
All right, that is Vodafone Idea talking about the way forward. But let's